All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. My name is Ryan, and this is As It Is Written. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we are going to be watching a video from R.C. Sproul. It will be talking about secularism and some of its history and where we're at. It's a little bit older video, but I think it'll be a good one. So here we go.
There's a real sense, I think, that every Christian is a missionary. If we go back to the New Testament and we see in the book of Acts that when persecution arose in Jerusalem, we read that all of the Christians were scattered except the apostles. And those who were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the gospel. That was the way the Christian church was born, not simply with the ministry of the clergy or the apostles, or even of the deacons. But it was the rank-and-file Christian that took the gospel wherever they went in the ancient world. But in our church today, we make a distinction, don't we, between a professional missionary and a layman who is not a missionary. But in biblical categories, every Christian, in a sense, is a missionary, because every Christian is called to participate in the mission that Christ has given to the church.
Amen. That's absolutely true. We all have a role to play in spreading the gospel and God's message to the world. And I think that a lot of Christians don't take that to heart. And, he may talk about this in a minute, but that's because of the separation that has been created between the priesthood and the laity. So historically, if we all go all the way back to how the New Testament was written, we are all kings and priests of God, okay, of God the Father. And so there was a separation that started to happen around 300 AD and going forward that caused there to be a split between the general priesthood and the laity. And so there are people who believe that there is a special class of Christian called a priest, and that is something that they are incapable of attaining, and that you need to have hands laid on you and passing on all this stuff, and it's just complete nonsense. What the Bible lays out is that you become a priest the moment that you submit yourself to God the Father. And if you look, so we'll get back to R.C. Sproul, but I just wanted to add that.
Well, when I look at what we do with missionaries, before we send them into a foreign country, what do we have them do? We don't just select a missionary, put them on an airplane, have them arrive in Timbuktu or someplace like that, and say, okay, do your thing. Before a missionary can go to the foreign field, that the person has to undergo in-depth study of the culture to which they are going. They have to learn the language, they have to learn the customs, they have to be able to understand the way people think and the way they behave in the land to which they are sent as missionaries. Well, let's assume that you are missionaries to the United States. What's your preparation? It's not enough simply to know the gospel, to know the content of scriptures, the subject matter that you want to communicate and bear witness to your culture. It is also very important that you understand the culture in which you are acting out your role as a missionary. So that's the purpose of this series of lectures, is to try to get a handle on the culture as it now presents itself to us as Christians. I think it would be a dreadful mistake to assume that the American culture is predominantly a Christian culture. Certainly, we live in a nation that has had an enormous influence from the church and from Judeo-Christian value systems. It's not that our country is pagan. Our country has been strongly influenced by Christianity. Some have said that we've been influenced to the degree that people are influenced when they receive a shot of inoculation to prevent a disease, that you put a minor dose of the disease in the inoculation so that they have just enough of it to be immune to the real thing. And some have maintained that that's what has happened here in the American culture, that we've had just enough Christianity impacting our society as to make us immune from the real thing. There's a sense, as I said, in which our nation is not pagan. Paganism is a pre-Christian situation. It's a situation that exists where the gospel and the light of the gospel has never been manifest in a particular environment. But that's not true about America. Ours is what I call a secular environment, a secular society. And the secularization of the American culture is a post-Christian phenomenon, not a pre-Christian. Pre-Christian is pagan. Post-Christian is secularized. Now, I think it's also important for us to understand that our culture is and has been a melting pot. We don't live in a culture that is monolithic. What is monolithic? A monolithic culture is a culture where only one definable worldview or value system is operating.
Just for those of you who love words as much as I do, if you break down the word monolithic, mono is a root that means one, and then lithic just means stone. So monolithic just means one stone, and so, yeah, and that's what you would be looking for to build out of if you were trying to make a monolith.
There's kind of a uniformity, as you find in some nations. You go, for example, into Red China, and you see a uniform system of thought that everybody is supposed to embrace. It's taught in the schools, it's advertised in posters, and even the uniformity comes down to literal uniforms. People dress in the same way, as there is this enforced conformity. But that's not been the American ideal. The American ideal has been we are a melting pot, so that there are all kinds of different beliefs and philosophies competing for acceptance within our society and within our culture. And if a Christian is going to be able to communicate to this culture, he has to be aware at least of the dominant systems that are operating within our culture. As I said, we're not monolithic, but the term that we use is pluralistic. And we'll have a separate study, a separate lecture just on pluralism. But the various schools of thought that are most dominant, I believe, in our culture today include the ones that I'm about to put up here on the blackboard. And we're going to look at each one of those individually in the lectures to come. First of all, there is the influence of what we call humanism. As I say, we will have a separate lecture defining the content and the perspective of humanism. Secondly, there is the influence of existentialism. How many of you think that you could give a good definition of existentialism? How many of you have never heard the word existentialism? All right, just a couple. Most of you have at least heard the term existentialism. But it's one of those terms that we hear bandied about in the culture, but very few people are able to give concrete definition to. Well, we'll have a separate lecture on existentialism. A third ism that has had a tremendous impact on our culture that most laymen have never heard of is the ism called positivism. How many of you have never heard of positivism? See, there's some more here that have more than have never heard of existentialism. And also there's the influence of a very ancient perspective or philosophy that we call hedonism. How many of you have never heard of hedonism? How many of you have heard of hedonism? You have heard of it. You have heard of that. Okay. All right. And then there is, as I said, pluralism. And relativism as it's and there's one other ism that I'm going to incorporate up above with positivism, which we call pragmatism, which is a distinctly American life and worldview. All right, so let's see, how many do I have there? 5. Humanism, existentialism, positivism, pragmatism, hedonism, and pluralism, and its corollary, relativism. All right, those are going to be the systems of thought or philosophical perspectives that we will be examining in this brief course.
And basically, those forms of thought, those ideas, have permeated our culture and completely gutted it. It's rotten to the core at this point, and it's because of the teachings of those beliefs and what they believe about humanity. And ultimately, they all reject that there is a God who cares about you, who came down and bled and died and resurrected so that you could be saved. So all of those other belief systems, those ways of thinking, they fundamentally reject God. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about that going forward.
But what I'm looking for today is this. Is there an overarching, generic, holistic philosophy or value system that would, in some sense, incorporate all of these? It's been said that no society can survive, no civilization can function without some unifying philosophical perspective. Even if you have all different kinds of views competing, there must be some kind of overarching atmosphere or environment that makes it possible even for these to coexist in a given society. And when the historians and the philosophers seek the common term, that common basic generic lowest common denominator that incorporates features of all of these, usually the term that we hear is the term secularism. And that's what I want to look at in the time that we have left today. Let me do my handiwork here with the eraser, and we'll start again with this word secularism.
And fundamentally, secularism is just removing religion, and Christianity specifically, from public life. And so we have secular schools, we have secular libraries, we have secular courts, we have secular governments, we have secular states. And so, that's what secularism is at its root, fundamentally, and he's going to explain it to us a little bit deeper.
Obviously, when we see that word, we see that we have a root and a suffix. And my favorite method of teaching is to do word studies and break these concepts down into its constituent parts so that we can get a hold of them. There's the word secular, and then there is the suffix. Now let's start at the back and work our way forward. Any time we see this 3-letter suffix, ism, what do we see? What do we find? What's it saying? What's it do to the word?
It makes it into a belief.
You're allowed to answer my question, you know. What does it do? Huh? What does ism do to a word? It makes it a state of being, a little bit more than that. A philosophy, a system of thought, what we call a Weltanschauung, a way of looking at the world, a view of the world, a value system. It's one thing, how many of you believe in humans? Huh? And think that being human is a good thing. It's one thing to be human, it's another thing to be a humanist. That is, one who embraces humanism. We all exist, but we are not all existentialists, are we? You put that ism, existentialism, on the end of the root for existence, and you're talking now about a philosophical system, a whole way of looking at things. You want to be practical, but does that make you a pragmatist? Huh? Of course not. All right, so we see that the suffix ism takes the root and elevates it to the level of a philosophical system. Now, the word secular is a perfectly good and positive word in the Christian's vocabulary. Historically, the church has always had a good view of that which was regarded as being secular. I'm thinking in terms of the whole of the history of the church. In the Middle Ages, for example, men were ordained to a specific role in the priesthood that was called the secular priesthood. Because those were men who had offices that took them out of the arena or the institution of the church to minister out in the world where there were specific needs that needed the healing touch of the church or the priestly mission of the church. There's a sense in which I was ordained as a secular clergyman because I was ordained to the teaching ministry, not to an ecclesiastical office within a local congregation. So I was commissioned to go to the university and to be a teacher out in the world, if you will, in the secular world that can be distinguished to some degree by that sphere that we have set apart and called the church or the sacred realm. But so often in Christians' mind, the distinction between sacred and secular is the distinction between the good and the bad. But that's not the way it was meant to be in the development of church history. It was simply a different sphere of operations. Okay? Now, the word secular has its origins.
Basically, it was the difference between being back at home base and being out in the theater of war, right? And so secular would be you're out and called to be someone who is leading others to Christ, and when you're inside the church, you're called to learn from others or to teach others. And so I think that would be kind of the difference there.
And its roots in the Latin language. It comes from the Latin word saeculum, which means, do we have any Latin scholars in here? What does the Latin word saeculum mean? What's its translation? It means, the word saeculum means, in the original Latin, world. Okay? I said a secular priest is one who ministers in the world. What does the Latin word mundus mean? Does anybody know? World. Remember Athanasius, St. Athanasius, what was on his tombstone? Athanasius contra mundum. Athanasius against what? The world. All right, so that mundus also means world. Well, both words mean the same thing in the original Latin. What was the difference? Well, the people in the ancient world understood that as human beings, they lived in time and in space. We still talk that way, don't we? That our life is spatial, it's geographical, there is a certain where-ness to my life. I live here, I am here, I'm not somewhere else. And there's also a time frame in which I live. Jesus talked about this place or this generation, this age, okay? The present age. So in the Latin, the word for this world, thinking in terms of time, is saeculum. And the word for this world in terms of space is mundus. Now, what in the world, what in the mundus or the saeculum does this have to do with our culture? Well, saeculum, or the secular, had to do literally with this time, this world in the present time. The secular realm is this world in this world in the present time. Now, what happens to the word secular when you add the ism? The basic overarching theme of secularism is this: that all of reality, all of life, every human value, every human activity must be understood in light of and judged by the value or the norm of this present time.
And you can see the insanity that comes from that belief system. When you have the values or norms that are constantly changing, what you see today is that the secular press will attack you for a view that was perfectly normal 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so we see, especially now and today, a rapid decline in our agreed upon social values because they are rapidly changing with the times. And it comes down to what this word actually means. And there's a reason that that a person chose that word to use over another word, where mundus, right? It's not mundularism. And so they chose secularism because it will update over time and have a constantly changing set of rules and values. And so we've seen those values drastically change in the last 10, 20 years, especially. If we look at 2000 and the belief system of the standard person in the United States in the year 2000, it's drastically different than what it is today. I mean, at that point, you would have never even heard of a transgendered person. They would have been a transvestite back in 2000. Gay people were around, but they were more of an oddity. And then today, you have all of those things that are right in your face and completely normal. And I'm not saying that gay people should be hurt or anything like that. Basically, we have all of these things that are so rapidly changing, and our world is so completely different than it was even 20 years ago. That's not the world that existed before then. Before then, you were called to live up to the expectations of your culture and of your ancestors, and it's a completely different system. That system doesn't change that system changes hardly at all, whereas our system changes almost completely overnight. And I think that's an important thing that a lot of Christians, especially in older generations, don't understand, is that we've gone from that from a Christian foundation, a religious foundation, to a secular one. And I think that's going to have very drastic issues that crop up in our culture in the going forward.
Where's the point of conflict between secularism and Christianity? Can you see it coming? The New Testament scriptures, the biblical worldview, is always concerned about long-range considerations. The Bible teaches us that we were created for eternity. That at the heart of the New Testament message is that Christ has come to give us life, a life that wells up into what? Eternal life. And that at the very beginning of our understanding of the world, we read in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, what? God created the heavens and the earth. So that we look at the earth and we see that it has a beginning in space and time. But before there is even a world, if I can use the term before, there is one who transcends the world, one who stands above the world, one who is outside of the restrictions of this space and time order that we call the world, namely God. In the beginning, God. And we, as part of the most core dimension of the Christian faith, we believe in a transcendent God. A God out there. A God who is beyond the confines of this planet. A God who is transcendent and a God who is what? Eternal. And that all judgments that God makes, all things that he does, are done from the perspective of what? Of the eternal. Now, in philosophy, we call that God considers everything sub-species aeternitatis. Now, that's just a fancy Latin phrase for a very simple idea. That means that God considers everything under, sub means under the species or the auspices. The auspices are from the perspective of the eternal. In fact, the admonition and the rebuke that Christ brings to this world is that men are only thinking short term. They're thinking in terms of the now and only the now instead of the future consequences of their behavior. Long term. And Jesus says that he comes from above. He descends from the eternal realm. And he calls the Christian to live his life in light of eternity. And that his values are to be measured by transcendent norms of eternal significance. I have a column that you know of in Table Talk, our magazine, and what's the byline, what's the title of the column? Right now counts what? Forever. Well, why did I choose that byline? Just to be cute? No. I did it because I said, if there's only one message that I can give to my generation, and I can say the same message over and over and over again until people begin to think about it, it's that. That's the one voice that I want to scream from the streets. Right now counts forever. What you do now has eternal significance. And I did that consciously aware of the fact that we are being pressed upon by every side from the philosophy of the secularist who says, bottom line, right now counts for what? Right now. There is no eternity. There is no eternal perspective. You've heard it said a jillion times, there are no absolutes. There are no abiding principles by which human life is to be judged, is to be embraced, is to be evaluated. All reality is restricted or limited to the now. We see it in different phraseology in theology. We've seen an attempt in 20th century theology to produce a secularized gospel. Remember the Death of God movement? One of the most important books that came out of the Death of God movement by Dr. Van Buren was called The Secular Meaning of the Gospel, in which he talked in terms of synthesizing classical Christianity with the philosophy of secularism. But how can you do that without declaring the death of God?
Yep. And it's a fundamental problem. The issue is that secularism is pointing at now and is ever changing, and God is unchanging. Okay? So you can't square that circle. There is no way for you to come up with a way to be both secular and Christian, to be a believer in God and to be a secularist. There is no way to do that, because ultimately the God of this universe has to be unchanging. He has to have always existed in the form that he is in now. And so that's just it is impossible for us to square away those two contradictory ideas. And I think that there's a lot of people that think that that's not the case, but unfortunately it is.
But you see, the death of God, in the terms of the loss of transcendence, the loss of the eternal, means for you the death of man. Because it means that history has no transcendent goal, no eternal purpose. That the meaning of your life is summed up in the words on the tombstone. Born 1925, died 1985. That's it. You have a terminal point of beginning and of ending with no ultimate significance. This is called the theology or the philosophy of the hic et nunc. The here and the now. Well, do you have to go to the library and get a dusty tome of philosophy, a heavy, weighty treatise on moral philosophy to be exposed to these ideas? Huh? Where else do you see it? The media is full of it. You know, my favorite illustration of it is that beer advertisement. You only go around life once, so do it with gusto. And you see the guy out in the sailboat, and the wind is blowing his hair, and the salt spray is splashing against his face, and he's having a fantastic time right now. Okay? Pepsi calls it what? The now generation. Do it now. Get it now. Because the message that comes through is, you better get it now. Because there is no tomorrow, ultimately. Now, we're going to consider hedonism later, but one of the themes of the Epicureans, who were hedonists in antiquity, one of their, bottom line of their philosophy was, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Contrast that with Jesus. Lay up treasures in heaven. Think in terms of eternity. Long-range implications. You see, this touches us most heavily, not simply in how we handle our bank accounts or in how we speculate philosophically, but it touches us at the level of how we invest our lives. Because life is an investment. And the question that modern man has to answer is he going to invest his life for short-term benefits or for long-term gains? And every time you are faced with a moral decision, the temptation to do something now that may have harmful after effects, you are caught up in the tension and the conflict between two worldviews right now. Do we live for the present, or do we live for eternity?
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, at the core of our biblical understanding of life and of our moral behavior is that there are actions, and that every action not only has a cause, but it also has what? A result or a consequence. And the consequence takes us to tomorrow. And
If we look at the word consequence, it means with sequence. That's what the prefix con means. It means with. And so, consequence means what's the next thing in the sequence.
and tomorrow, and tomorrow. What did Shakespeare say? Creeps in its petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Okay. But for the Christian, there is no last syllable of recorded time.
Amen.
Our lives are forever. But beyond the secular or the saculum, there is the eternal. And that's what the Christian faith is all about. Why should a person be worried about salvation in terms of personal redemption if there is no eternal dimension? What is the mission of the church if secularism is correct? Why should we be concerned about redemption of individuals? All we can really do, and churches get into this, all we can really do is minimize pain and suffering for a season. We can never really offer ultimate answers to the human predicament. Because for the secularist, there is no ultimate answer because there is no ultimate realm.
Mm-hmm.
This side of eternity is the exclusive sphere of human activity. It's not by accident, as we will see, that for the most part, those who buy into secularism, who are thinking people, ultimately embrace a philosophy of despair. And that despair will manifest itself in a host of ways. Escapism through drugs, alcohol, and other forms of behavior to dull the senses from the message that is being proclaimed, indeed screamed from every corner of our culture. There is no tomorrow ultimately. It is a philosophy of despair, and it is right now competing for men's minds in the United States of America. What we're going to look at in the weeks to come are the constituent elements that make up secularism. Humanism, you've heard of secular humanism. There's also secularistic existentialism, positivism, and those different philosophies may be in a collision course with each other, but they all embrace one common point, namely the denial of the transcendent and of the eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Look for it in your culture. Be aware of it when you see it. For we need to understand the world in which we live.
Amen.
Clearly.
So I'm very happy that you could join me today for watching R.C. Sproul explain secularism to us. Right now, we're going to move into the end of our stream. I know it's been a short one today. I'm going to read 2 chapters, one from the Old and one from the New Testament. And so that's where we're going to end it. Thank you for joining me. We're going to get started here with Numbers chapter 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. Oh, you know what? We're going to restart that. Didn't mean to be on NKJV here. I meant to be on NKJV, not on KJV. So let me fix that in both of these so I don't get messed up at the end. Let's see here. NKJV. Searching. There we go. All right, take 2. Numbers, chapter 1. The first census of Israel. Now the Lord spake. All right, it's one of those days today. Numbers is going to be fun to read. Is this not the full chapter? Oh. There we go. Okay. Now I'm back into it. All right, hopefully for the final time. Numbers, chapter 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of meeting, on the first day of the 2nd month, in the 2nd year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. These are the names of the men who shall stand with you. From Reuben, Elazar the son of Shadur. From Simeon, Shelumiel the son of Zurishaddai. From Judah, Nashon the son of Aminadab. From Issachar, Nathanael the son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliab the son of Helon. From the sons of Joseph, from Ephraim, Elishama the son of Amihud. From Manasseh, Gamaliel the son of Pedazur. From Benjamin, Abidan the son of Gidoni. From Dan, Ahiezer the son of Amishadai. From Asher, Pagiel the son of Ochran. From Gad, Eliasaph the son of Duel. From Naphtali, Ahira the son of Enan. These were chosen from the congregation, leaders of their fathers' tribes, heads of the divisions in Israel. Then Moses and Aaron took these men who had been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month, and they recited their ancestry by families, by their fathers' houses according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, each one individually. As the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. Now the children of Reuben, Israel's oldest son, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. From the children of Simeon, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, of those who were numbered, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Simeon were 59,300. From the children of Gad, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Gad were 45,650. From the children of Judah, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Judah were 74,600. From the children of Issachar, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Issachar were 54,400. From the children of Zebulun, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Zebulun were 57,400. From the sons of Joseph, the children of Ephraim, their genealogies by their names, or by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Ephraim were 40,500. From the children of Manasseh, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Manasseh were 32,200. From the children of Benjamin, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Benjamin were 35,400. From the children of Dan, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Dan were 62,700. From the children of Asher, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Asher were 41,500. From the children of Naphtali, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Naphtali were 53,400. These are the ones who were numbered, whom Moses and Aaron numbered with the leaders of Israel, 12 men, each one representing his father's house, So all who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war in Israel, all who were numbered were 603,550. But the Levites were not numbered among them by their fathers' tribe. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. The children of Israel shall pitch their tents, everyone by his own camp, everyone by his own standard, according to their armies. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the children of Israel. And the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus the children of Israel did, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So they did. All right, so that was our chapter from Numbers. The book of Numbers is going to have a lot of lists like that. It's very important that we have all of these numbers and all of this information. There's a lot of things that we can learn from it. We can know what the population was at this time, and we can make some estimates as to how many women and children there were, and all sorts of other things. So it's beautiful that we have this information, and I'm very thankful for it. It's important that we hear it. All right, so we're going to move on to Acts. We are in Acts chapter 14. Now it happened in Iconium that they went together to the synagogue of the Jews, and so spoke that a great multitude both of the Jews and of the Greeks believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. Therefore they stayed there a long time, speaking boldly in the Lord, who was bearing witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. But the multitude of the city was divided, part sided with the Jews, and part with the apostles. And when a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews, with their rulers, to abuse and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding region. And they were preaching the gospel there. And in Lystra a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently, and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, Stand up straight on your feet. And he leaped and walked. Now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitudes. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. Then Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, We must, through many tribulations, enter the kingdom of God. So when they had appointed elders in every church, and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord, in whom they had believed. And after they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia, Now, when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Italia. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had completed. Now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So they stayed there a long time with the disciples. All right, thank you for joining me today. I had a really fun time watching that video from R.C. Sproul and reading from the Bible. I hope that you join me again tomorrow for another about an hour or hour and a half stream. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful week. Goodbye.